Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Tomorrow is our special. We're going to talk about the great conservative thinkers of the last 100 years and be inspired by them, get back to basics. First, wonderful news, great news. Joe Biden has put Kamala Harris in charge of the border. She's the new point person, which is just swell. Here's Biden announcing it yesterday.
It's not her full responsibility and job, but she's leading the effort because I think the best thing to do is to put someone who, when he or she speaks, they don't have to wonder about, is that where the president is? When she speaks for me, doesn't have to check with me. She knows what she's doing, and I hope we can move this along.
Here's Kamala a couple years ago questioning the guy who was nominated to lead ICE.
Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between
I'm talking about perception.
officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no.
Are you aware that there's a
that
perception?
puts ICE in the same category as the KKK? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm very specific about what I'm asking you. Are you aware of a perception that the way that the discretion
I see no parallel.
I'm not finished.
I see none.
I'm not finished.
That's great. I'm glad she's in charge, talking about the perception that some have between ICE and the KKK. She goes on and says, you know, there may need to be some
these
work.
Children, the circumstances by which they arrived, is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. And so we are here to stand up and say that we are not going to allow this to happen, not on our watch. I will tell you, when elected, the first thing I'm going to do, one of the first things, is to shut down these private detention facilities. Just shut them down.
Well, she's been in office for, 2 months now, and there's 15,000 unaccompanied youth, unaccompanied kids in detention right now in America. 15,000, more than ever. And she's bragged about California being a sanctuary state as well. But don't you worry, she's going to do a real bang-up job as the new point person on the border. Do you remember Baghdad Bob? Do you remember Baghdad Bob? Someone made this reference the other day, and I love it, right? Calling Biden, and specifically the head of Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, the new Baghdad Bob. I love that comparison. Baghdad Bob, if you remember, was the spokesperson for Saddam Hussein. And he would stand outside, he'd stand in Baghdad, but outside, he would have these press conferences, and he'd say, there's no threat, no proof of America's existence in Baghdad at all. No American infidels here, never. They're not within 1,000 miles of Baghdad. He said, this is an illusion. They're trying to sell an illusion. And he's saying this, and meanwhile, the American tanks are rolling in the background. No Americans within 1,000 miles, and they're like 100 yards away. Same thing here with Biden. Oh, no, there's no immigration crisis at the southern border. What? There's no Guatemalans within 100 miles of the border. That's just an illusion. This is why Kamala and Biden won't go to the border, right? They keep being asked if they'll go, and they keep saying, no plans. We have no plans to go to the border. Maybe one day we'll go. They don't want to go, because once they go, they can't play the ignorance game anymore, right? Once they go, they can't say everything's fine here, because it's clearly not. They lose their plausible deniability if they actually go, so they will not ever go. Jen Psaki, the spokesperson for Biden, she slipped the other day, and she called it a crisis at the border, right? She was doing her whatever, and she said, there's a crisis at the border. And one of the reporters asked for some clarification on that.
Were there expectations set with the Mexicans that they help deal with the situation on the border?
There have been expectations set outside of unrelated to any vaccine doses or requests for them, that they would be partners in dealing with the crisis on the border.
When you were talking about
we can stop there. That is the wrong clip. That is my fault. Sorry, everyone, but this is live television. The reporter in the audience, he says something like, You mentioned it was a crisis a sec. Why don't I just tell you what the clip was? You mentioned there was a crisis a second ago. Do you believe it's a crisis? And she goes, challenge, challenge. It's a challenge. And he goes, oh, does this signify maybe a change in course that the administration has taken at the border? And she goes, nope, nope, next question. Slipped, called it a crisis. No, it's a challenge, that's all. And they're not gonna let you see anything either. They won't let you see any of it. We have thousands of kids in federal government custody, thousands. I live in San Diego, 1,500 of them are being flown to San Diego. Pretty amazing. And no journalists are going to be allowed inside our San Diego Convention Center to show us what's actually happening right in front of us. Why not? If it's not a crisis, if there's no problem, let's see some pictures. John Moore is a photographer. He's a photojournalist. He works for Getty. And he's covered, well, let me read here. He said, for the past 4 presidential administrations, I have accompanied U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents and photographed their encounters with migrants as they enforce immigration policies. He's been doing this for 4 different administrations. A long time this guy's been in the game. No longer. Last week, when I documented migrant detentions in El Paso, I had to do so from the Mexican side of the border, taking long-range shots. Until now, journalists have not had to stand in another country to cover what's happening in the United States. Think about that. He had to go to Mexico in order to cover the reality of America. Since the change in administration, those agents have been physically blocking journalists from the riverbank. He says, after I was turned down for official access on a trip in February, I followed a Border Patrol transport bus in my own vehicle to where agents were detaining migrants. They stopped me before I got even close enough to take pictures. They called a supervisor, ordered me to leave immediately. We've gone from the Trump-era zero tolerance policy towards immigrants to a Biden-era zero access policy for journalists covering immigration. This development is unprecedented in modern history. This guy is not a right-wing activist. He's not a border he's a reporter. He's a journalist, a real photographer who's been in this game for a long time. He said this has never happened before him, the way it's shut off from you, from us. Now, why is this guy especially important? This is the guy who took that now famous picture of that little girl from Honduras crying. We have that video, we have that picture here. He's the one who took this picture that, if you remember, Time magazine photoshopped and put Trump in it. Do you remember this? And the headline, it's the tweet that they sent out at Time, it said, what kind of country are we? Trump's border separation policy, what kind of country are we? I distinctly remember when I first saw that picture. And I said, oh, there's this massive moral outrage over it. This little girl ripped from her mother's arms, crying, screaming, how could Trump the monster do such a thing, ripping children from their mothers? And I saw that picture and I said, I guarantee you, that's not what happened. You wanna know the true story of what happened there? That picture's from 2018. The mother was stopped on this side of the border by a Border Patrol agent, and the mom put her daughter down for a second. It was 11 p.m. The girl was tired. She cried. As 3-year-olds often do, the mom picked her back up and they were never once separated. They were not for a split second, they were not separated. Yet that girl was the poster child for Trump's ripping of children away from their parents. That girl and her mother were never separated. And that was the second time that mother came into this country illegally. She came into this country illegally in 2013 and was deported just after that. An absolute total hack job manipulation, emotional manipulation by the media to manipulate you. I bring it up because that photographer took that picture. And even then, even after all the trouble that picture caused, the PR nightmare that picture caused for Donald Trump, the Trump administration never stopped him from doing his job. He said the image caused a public relations crisis, but still officials did not deny me access during subsequent trips to the border. There's 10,000. Does that make sense? Does that point make sense? Trump never stopped him, but Biden has. 10,000 apprehensions in the Rio Grande Valley last week. One of the biggest weeks ever. And it went completely unobserved by the public. Purposefully. That alone is as big of a scandal as what's happening at the border itself. Because the left knows that they can keep you from seeing it. And then they can use their plausible deniability until we, the people, get bored and stop paying attention to it. It's the Cuomo effect. Some people relate it to Cuomo. I call it the Governor Blackface effect. Remember Governor Blackface? He's the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam. He had this blackface controversy, right? And everyone's calling for him to leave. Everyone's calling for him to resign. Democrats in Virginia are calling for him to resign. He's got to go. He's got to go. He's racist. He's horrible. What did he do? Just waited. Just waited a couple weeks, went away. Same with Cuomo. He was at some church or something. He was leaving, and some adoring fan came and said, oh, please don't resign or whatever. And he said, I'm not going anywhere, darling. So he just waited out. Waited out. The media will cover for you long enough, and people will move on and forget that it ever happened at all. And Biden thinks the same thing's going to happen with our border. He's probably right, by the way. He's probably right, unfortunately. He's probably right. You and I won't stop talking about it, but the majority of American people will stop thinking about it, especially if they don't ever see it. So that's his plan. Just ignore it. Prevent people from seeing it. It'll take much longer for people to feel the consequences of illegal immigration. And wait it out while we just move on to the next shiny object. 15,000 kids in our federal government's custody. There's one facility in Texas that was designed to hold 250 immigrants. 250. There's now 4,000. Here's Kamala asked if she's going to visit the border.
Do you have plans to visit the border?
Not today. But I have before, and I'm sure I will again.
Good news, everyone. She's now in charge. True story. Thanks, Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, before we get to this segment about moral panic relating to guns and the Second Amendment, I just want to play this clip real quick. So in the last segment, we played the clip of Joe Biden talking with his mask on. And you're like, I'm pretty sure the President of the United States is vaccinated. I'm pretty sure every single person in that room is vaccinated. Why is he still wearing his mask? Here's Ted Cruz coming to the microphone, and you can't hear, but off camera, someone says, put your mask on. Here's what he does.
Yeah, when I'm talking to the TV camera, I'm not going to wear a mask, and all of us have been immunized, so you're welcome to step away if you like. The whole point of a vaccine, CDC guidance, is what we're following.
That's right. That's proper. As Adam Carolla said yesterday, California needs to lock down harder, or else we're going to end up like Texas. It's been 2 weeks since they lifted the mask mandates, and it's been a bloodbath. Has not been a bloodbath. But once you're swept up in a moral panic, it's hard to get out of them. Gotta wear masks forever! The moral panic I want to talk about in this segment is guns. Check out this tweet here, or this message from our former president, Barack Obama. He says, we should be able to live our lives without wondering if the next trip outside our home could be our last. We should, but in America, we can't. Oh. This reminds me of LeBron James when he said, this is a quote, you're literally being hunted every time you step foot outside your home. As a black man, you're literally being hunted. People. Just a little perspective, if people care about facts. Because that's the thing with the moral panic, it just gets you whipped up. Facts can bring you back down, give you some perspective. bring you some peace. 2016, there were 6,700 black people killed in car crashes. 6,700. There were 2,570 killed by other black people. 2,570 black people killed by other black people. 2,500. There were 243 black people killed by white people. There were 18 black people killed by cops. And 96 struck by lightning. Okay? And LeBron James saying you're literally hunted every time you step outside your house. Here's Barack Obama saying we should be able to live our lives without wondering if this is every time we step outside of our house. You need to be scared every time you leave. Could be your last. That is absolute hysterical nonsense. And that's what moral panics are. Something happens, that's the first step. Second step, the media whips you up. The third step, everyone gets anxious and in a panic. And then the fourth step, the government comes in to save the day. That's the process of a moral panic. The chance of being murdered in America is 1 in 20,000. Right? And if you stay out of the drug trade, your chances go up. Most murders happen between people who know each other, and most actually occur in the home. Mass shootings, which is what inspired this comment, they're even more rare. You have as close to 0% chance of dying from a mass murder as possible. There's about 50 people a year are killed in mass shootings, about 50 people a year. So that's a 1 in 6.6 million chance of being killed in a mass shooting. And think about it, 1 in 6.6 million. We have our former president is telling people you need to be scared to go outside. It could be your last time. Why? Because if that's true, because that's what he says, in America, we can't. His point here is America's terrible. America's awful. America's rotten to its core. America's evil. America's the worst. So just hand over your guns and we'll make it safe. See how that works? See the process of the moral panic? Now, in his defense a little bit, he did live in Chicago, where last weekend 15 people were shot and 3 were killed last weekend. But you can't talk about that because you can't blame white supremacy and you can't blame Trump for that. Although I'm sure there's some convoluted way someone could. I got some numbers here I want to share on interracial crime. Again, I think numbers are important. Right? Facts. Sorry. These numbers are true for the last few years. I'm just going to take the average here. Every year is about the same. So this is a bit of a ballpark just for the sake of our conversation here. And I think this is the easiest way to put it. There are about 550 black people. I'll tell you, 2016 it was 576. So I'm ballparking it. There's 550 black people every year. 550 black people kill a white person. 550 black people every year kill a white person. Kill 550 white people. 250 white people kill black people every year. Does that make sense? Can you visualize that? So it's 570 black people kill white people. About 250 white people kill black people every year. It's much more likely that a black person kills a white person than a white person kills a black person. I don't it's so racist. Those are the FBI crime statistics. I don't know what you want me to do. And I share that because the perspective is the exact opposite, right? LeBron James feels like he can't even leave his house. Because what? What are you talking about? You can't leave your house. Right? That's the narrative. That white people are killing black people all over the place. It's not true. If anything, the argument can be made that it's the exact opposite. But something happens, there's a shooting, you gotta whip people up, people get anxious and make ridiculous statements like this, and then what happens? Well, the government swoops in to save the day. Here's your vice president.
And I believe that it is possible, it has to be possible, that people agree that these slaughters have to stop. And this is, again, you reject the false choice and stop pushing it for sure. Stop pushing the false choice that this means everybody's trying to come after your guns. That is not what we're talking about.
Yeah. Translation, they're coming after your guns. Is exactly what that means. Perspective matters. It's essential. One of my favorite stories in this regard, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. They asked people, how many unarmed black men are killed by police every year? We've got to answer that question. How many unarmed black men are killed by police every year? And then they broke it down based off of your political affiliation. Very liberal, moderate, conservative, very conservative, and what percentage of each of these groups think that the number of unarmed black men that are killed every year. It's either 41 or 44%. I'll go with 41. 41% of liberals think it's over 1,000. Over 1,000 unarmed black men are killed by police every single year. That'd be 3 a day, right? So that's half of liberals think that it's 3 unarmed black men a day are killed by police. Now, if you believed that, then what LeBron James and Barack Obama say kind of makes some sense. What's the truth? 13. Not over 1,000. It's 13. 13 too many, of course. Although we don't even know what really happened in each of those 13 cases, but 13 versus over 1,000. What would you rather deal with? Where would you rather live? Would you rather live in the dystopian fantasy land that Barack Obama and LeBron James are telling you? Or would you rather live in reality? Because one's going to have you live in fear and anxiety and terror and hate this country. And the other is going to let you leave your house. Last week, we talked a lot about anti-Asian hate crimes. People scared to go outside, people scared to get out of bed. LA Times wrote this article about this woman who's afraid to get out of bed because she's been whipped up in such a frenzy. People buying pepper spray in bulk for no reason. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. What are you doing with bulk pepper spray? Right? She's like gonna walk around with like a fire extinguisher full of pepper spray, just spraying it all over the place in front of you. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it's all because last year there were 122 hate crimes out of 19 million Asians. 122 out of 19 million? And we're getting all worked up over that? And most of those were in San Francisco, New York, and LA. It sounds like they have a crime problem. It's not that America has an anti-Asian hate crime problem. It sounds like these big cities have a crime problem. Let me give you another one related to guns. This is Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's the senator from Connecticut. He's a big anti-gun guy. Here he is.
We shouldn't be putting aside Republicans. They bear a responsibility as well. That was the whole point of my exchange this morning with Senator Cruz, because they are the ones who are ducking that responsibility and become complicit in all of these shootings. It's not just Boulder. It's 100 killings a day, not to mention the emotional trauma and injuries that result, the 8 children lost every day to guns that are stored unsafely.
Hold on. Whoa. Did you catch that? See, this is what's wild. So many people, and I don't blame people for this, because there's 3 groups of people. People who are just blindly oblivious to everything that's going on. But they just have a job. I mean, that's like, they have a job and they just don't pay attention. They don't listen to talk radio. They don't watch this show. They don't watch The First, right? They're busy. They got a job to do. And then people like you who have a job to do, but take the time to be informed and know what's going on. And then me, this is my job, is to listen to stuff like this, listen carefully, ask questions, get to the truth. Right? So I hear that quote and I'm thinking, hold on. Most people hear that quote and they just go with it. They're like, wow, 8 kids a day are killed by accidental shootings. Wow, that's terrible. And they just go with it. Because they're busy. They don't have time to think critically of that type of stuff. You're busy too. My job is to think critically and point out these like mind-boggling inaccuracies. So 8 kids a day killed by accidental discharges? That doesn't sound right. It's not. He got that number from the Brady campaign. They're probably the biggest anti-gun activist group. So I found their website where they call it Family Fire. So it's not Friendly Fire, it's called Family Fire. Improperly stored guns. But the website did not back up their statistic with anything at all. The head of the Brady Foundation said, we can all agree that 8 children being unintentionally shot, injured, or killed every day is unconscionable. See the difference there? So he said, the head of the Brady Foundation said, 8 kids a day shot, injured, or killed. The senator just said killed. So there's that difference, right? But then, what did Richard Blumenthal really mean to say? Or what is the truth, I should say? There's not 8 kids a day killed by accidental discharges. It's 70 a year. That's not 8 kids a day. That's 1 kid every 5 days. Do you see the difference? 8 a day versus 1 every 5. Now, 1 every 5, still too many, okay? But that's a massive difference. And for a US senator to get that wrong is a pretty big deal. We're going to talk a lot more about moral panics moving forward because you think we'd learn our lesson by now, right? But we haven't. We keep getting whipped up. 1 Corinthians 14:40 says God is not a God of confusion, but a God of peace. The line is, but all things should be done decently and in order. You can do a whole study in the Bible about order, God bringing order. God is order, clarity, peace, and harmony. The true story is when you spout off wildly inaccurate numbers and create these moral panics that have no resemblance to reality at all, first of all, you're not acting decently and you're not creating order. You're creating confusion, panic, and division. And that's what we're against. True story. Mike Slater. Coming up next, we're going to talk about an Asian man who lived in LA who fought back against the riots in LA decades ago. We'll see what he says about anti-Asian hate crime coming up next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Last couple of days, we've been talking a lot about the true story regarding anti-Asian hate crimes, and we've been getting actual, numbers and perspective, and hopefully peace. I want to go to our next guest, who has quite a story to tell. You may not remember, perhaps you do. 1992, the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. Once the rioters started to get closer to the Asian part of town, well, they met some potential resistance. And Tony Moon was one of those men. Mr. Moon, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Mike. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. Just call me Tony for short. It's easier.
I'll do it, Tony. I'm glad you're here, brother. Before we get to anti-Asian hate crimes today and being offended at everything all the time, can you tell us the quick of that story? Like, where were you in 1992?
I was actually what you would call the offensive team. So we had our uncles, our fathers, and our older brothers on the roofs, and then you had young guys like me. At that time, I was 19, that were in the cars patrolling and driving and basically trying to hunt down the guys that were shooting at us.
Who were the guys that were, this is wild. Who were the guys that were shooting at you? Like, take us back, and like, what was it like, and how dangerous was it, et cetera?
Right. So it wasn't the looters. I mean, people running in there grabbing diapers and TVs, that wasn't the problem. And what it was with a lot of the Hispanic gang members that were around in that area, or especially around Koreatown, during that time of, I guess, just, lawlessness and the police standing down, they were taking pot shots at us. And this was the 90s, so drive-bys were pretty prevalent, and that's what was occurring in a lot of these different plazas throughout Koreatown.
So because you guys defended your property, how much damage was done?
I would say quite a bit. I was reading some of the estimates. I think it came out to like $500 million. I mean, $500 million in terms of damages. And the sad thing is a lot of these owners didn't have insurance because of the areas that they had the stores in. So not only do they lose their livelihood, but they also lost the opportunity to rebuild as well. And that really made it painful for a lot of Korean Americans that were trying to restart after the riots.
Why did you guys decide to defend the way you did? What was the concern that would happen if you didn't do what you did?
Well, the verdict, that's a good question. The verdict came down on a Wednesday, and that's when it started. It actually started on Florence and Normandy, and we saw it spread from there down south and further up north, and then it really got bad on Thursday. And it was only on Thursdays when we found out that the police were asked to stand down. And at that time, Daryl Gates was chief of police. And when you no longer have the protection of the police, you're kind of left to fend for your own. So what ended up happening is that a lot of these Korean store owners that didn't have firearms, I mean, a lot of them didn't own them, actually had to go to the Korean stores, gun owners and actually ask for the firearms and get the bullets. and no background check, anything like that. I mean, this was an emergency situation where we actually had to defend the community. And I think we took it upon ourselves to basically shoulder that weight because, we couldn't rely on public assistance anymore. And we had to, we were left to our own means to defend ourselves. So that's why a lot of us took the initiative. And this was more of a way of preserving our national identity here as well. And not only as Koreans, but as Americans living in LA.
Wow. Okay, let's pivot. Let's explain that. Preserving your national identity. What does that mean? What did that mean to you, and what does that mean to you today?
Well, I consider myself an American first, of Korean descent. Yet I hold a lot of the cultural values that comes from being Korean, which I integrate with American values, which in a lot of ways is very complementary. So in order to hold on to that and to retain that, I mean, we had to press back or push back against what was happening to our community, especially when it came to being shot at. And this was a really weird riot in time where the firefighters that were trying to put out the fires were actually getting shot at as well, which was unheard of during any riot. And this kind of set the precedence for that.
Let's talk today. Do you feel that there is a lot of anti-Asian hatred or hate crimes occurring in America?
I think that's depends on how you look at it. So I saw some of the videos that were coming out from the Bay Area. A lot of these people that were assaulting the Asian seniors seem to be of African-American descent. But my personal thought is that it's more of a crime of opportunity than race. And you look at, I look at the urban center as kind of a concrete jungle, right? And so like in any jungle scenario, they're going to prey upon the weak and the defenseless, the old, the infirmed. So that's kind of what I see with that, where, seniors are a very vulnerable population group. And then being of Asian descent and culture, I mean, we're very, accommodating, right? So having that, and not only that, but not only reporting the crime, because a lot of these attacks were caught on video. And I don't know how many of these attacks are going to get reported. And there may be more that we're not aware of. But, there may be a portion of it that is race related, but I think a lot of it is just basically crime in general. We had a state that was locked down for a year now, right? And so a lot of people aren't working, and there's a need for income, for money. So it drives people to crime who may a year ago may not even have thought of that, right? And then you have elements that are doing crime right now, but are even more emboldened because of what they see what's happening, especially with the lax criminal justice system we have in the state right now.
Yep. Yeah, I'd argue Prop 47 in California, which turned felonies into misdemeanors, letting prisoners out of jail because of COVID,
right?
Literally electing a Marxist to be the new DA in San Francisco.
Right.
I mean, these are obviously going to have consequences in this concrete jungle,
exactly,
no matter who lives there. I want to talk, Tony, about the culture, Asian culture, and obviously the word Asian is so bizarre too, because like, what is that? Like, there's a big difference between Pakistan and Korea, right? But they're all considered Asian, so that's worth discussing too. But you mentioned how like different Korean culture aspects of the Korean culture, and the ones that complement well to American culture. I want to explore that because that's super important. So what are some things that you value especially out of Korean culture?
Well, I think they're trying to shift it now, but we've always been a masculine type culture. We've prided ourselves on being able to kind of pull ourselves by our bootstraps. If you look at Korean history in general, one of the greatest admirals on naval battles that was fought was during the Imjin War against the Japanese. And these were against all odds, and the nation itself would have been pretty much swallowed up by the Japanese during the Tokugawa era. And then you also have the time period of colonialization by the Japanese during the turn of the century, when we were, our identity was taken away. We were no longer allowed to speak Korean. We were considered second-class Japanese. Some of us actually served in different armed forces. So with that, I think there's a lot of pride in being Korean, because if you look on a map, geographically, we're basically like a peninsula, like Italy, right? And we're on both sides. We have China to the north and we have Japan to the south. And so to retain that national identity, you have to push back on forces that are trying to envelop you, right? And I think historically, as a people, that's been kind of ingrained in us, right? And not only that, but also you had the Korean War, which would have basically totally done away with democracy in general in Korea, and would have, had all of us, goose stepping with North Korea, and saluting to Kim Jong-un. But we're a very independent and prideful people, and I would say that culturally, I see that with my father. And then I also see that in America too. We're a very proud nation. I mean, we have nothing to be ashamed of in this country in terms of what we've done in the past, because, honestly, everybody screws up. There's no perfect country out there. We all have, our skeletons in the closet, and we have things that we've done in the past that we're not proud of. But we need to move on from that, and we need to kind of look at the future with a different pair of eyes and realize that, what we've done in the past is not who we are in the present, and by no means is it going to be who we are into the future, right? So we just continue to come out being better than who we were before, but there's no way we can neglect that as part of our history and historical makeup as well as Americans.
So good. I just read this great article on Barry Weiss's webpage, and it was written by a Muslim man, and he was talking about his past prejudice against Jews.
Mm-hmm. And
the point of the article was white people don't have a lock on racism or prejudice against others. And I'm just hearing you talk about the centuries of battles between the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans and whatever. Do white people have a lock on racism, or is there prejudice within all groups of people?
Yeah, that's something that I'm glad you asked that, because it's also prevalent in Asia. Like I'm considered an East Asian. East Asians are anyone from China, Korea, Japan, and then you have South Asians, which you mentioned before, like Pakistan, India, further south, like Burma, Thailand. You have, we're all segmented, and it's all due to pigmentation, right? And that's historical throughout all of history. I mean, if you look at basically how the wars were fought, and then if you look at the caste system that India has, I mean, it's not that different. And, growing up in America, I grew up in Boyle Heights, which is a largely Hispanic neighborhood, being the only Korean kid, because I immigrated here from Germany. I mean, I was weird as weird can be, because I looked Asian, but I had a German accent, and I just, talk about it. Every reason to get your butt kicked for a year. I mean, that's right. So I, being in that situation where you are a minority of minorities, I mean, you realize that, people will always see the differences of your skin and who you are, but it only takes time for them to understand you as an individual. But that comes through dialogue and just being with that person and just spending time with that person. I think that's been the key difference right now in this country, is that we've all kind of made our encampments. We've set our battle lines in terms of what we're going to stand and what hill we're going to die on. That the expression of dialogue and just trying to find commonality is becoming a lot more rare, when it should be, a lot more prevalent, given the situation that we're in this country and just kind of things that we've seen. Because at the end of the day, I mean, whether you're on the left or right, I truly believe in my heart that Americans love America, right? And just the expression of it is different according to whatever tribe that you belong to.
Tony, we got to run real quick. I read an LA Times article about Asian woman, who all this trauma of her childhood being Asian in America bubbled up because of what happened last week. And the example she gave was that her parents did not pack her like an ethnically Korean or Japanese or whatever it was lunch. She had Lunchables instead, and she felt like that was removing her identity. What would you say to that woman living in America?
I would say there's larger fish to fry, and that's something that happened when you were a kid. You got to move on from that. You're an adult now, right? You're a lot older and wiser, and you know that if you're a parent, and if that woman has kids, that you're gonna mess up. You're gonna basically do things that maybe aren't gonna make your kid happy. But as long as it's not a point where you're sending your kid to therapy as an adult, I think you did great. So just to cry about not being able to be culturally, open about your lunch, I think that's kind of petty. Versus being shot at during the riots because you're trying to hold on to your community. I think it just weighs different to me.
Tony Moon, you're the man. Let's talk again, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
Yeah, man. My pleasure. We'll definitely do it again. I want to come back. We'll talk about Heritage Foundation, about the tax increases coming our way. Tons of spending, inflation, all this mess. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, add it to the list. We got a million things still coming. Aside from all the cultural issues, we still have a bunch of economic issues as well, including an infrastructure project coming. This is AOC. One of the big goals we had when we introduced the Green New Deal was to show how people thought about climate change from being a $1 billion program to a $1 trillion opportunity. This infrastructure project package generally seems to be shaping up in that kind of framework. Super. Joel Griffith is here from Heritage Foundation. What's up, Joel?
Hello. Thanks for having me this afternoon.
Man, good. I'm really grateful you're here. So I haven't even wrapped my head around an infrastructure program yet. So how much money are we talking about, and what's their goal? What would be in it?
Yeah, well, the details are still being worked out, but it appears that this could be a $3 trillion infrastructure package. And it's hard to get our minds around that type of money, but $3 trillion, we're talking roughly $10,000 a person in infrastructure spending. And they say the goal is infrastructure, but that's actually not the true goal. I think AOC is more on the right track here. This is about centralizing even more power, economic power, in the hands of Washington, D.C. And traditionally, with infrastructure, these are bipartisan packages. Usually it's a focus on interstate highways and airports. When you hone in on this is actually getting the federal government involved in school construction, local projects, many items that typically are handled by state and local government. And that's what we want. We want state and local governments having that control, because that results in more efficiency, more transparency, more accountability. I mean, think about your own school district. If you have a project that needs done or there's wasteful spending, you can go directly to the school board or the superintendent, because your property taxes are being impacted. When you centralize this power in the hands of Washington, D.C., you lose that control, and it opens everything up to more corruption and squandering of not just current resources, but future resources as well, because we're borrowing $3 trillion to do this.
Such a good point about the local control. I was gonna say something about it. Oh, why when the government says infrastructure, do people's brains just turn off, right? We're just like, oh, it's an infrastructure project. Okay, whatever you want. Why do we just go along with that?
I think we go along with that usually because when we think infrastructure, we're often thinking of when we're traveling, let's say from Pittsburgh to Baltimore or from LA to San Francisco on the interstate highway system. When we think of traveling, when we think of flying somewhere. The problem with this bill is we're not really talking about freeways and airports so much. We're talking about a transformation of our economic system and our energy system. They're not calling it the Green New Deal, but you know that many billions of dollars in this package will go to transforming how things are done. And that word sounds really great as well, transforming. But when you're talking about the government taking resources from one person and then channeling it to DC and then distributing it to the sectors that they prefer, what you end up with at the very least is cronyism. But more importantly, for all of our pocketbooks, you end up in inefficiencies, meaning that the cost of things that we need go up. Things like energy, which is used not just to heat and cool our homes and cook our dinner, but is also used to travel. And if we want to see a situation like we see in Germany, where they have implemented a version of a Green New Deal, look at how the typical middle-class family is doing in Germany. They earn $10,000 less per year in disposable income per family. That's what we have to look forward to here. And that's what people like AOC aren't telling us.
How much does an infrastructure project or plan usually cost? I mean, again, $3 trillion, we can't wrap our head around that. What's the norm?
That's a great question. I can tell you it is substantially under $3 trillion over 10 years. And that's because there's that split usually. You have the federal government that handles components of infrastructure, but much infrastructure. You think about your wastewater treatment centers. Think about your local roads and your local schools and your libraries, your fire departments, police stations. That's almost exclusively handled on the state and local level. But the goal of the current group of bureaucrats and elected officials in DC, they want to take away that power and control. You know, it really drives some of our friends on the left nuts when they think about places like Florida that are competitive and open for business, in Texas and Georgia. And you look at how inefficient government is in places like Chicago, LA, and New York City. They can't stand that. They see these left-wing governments failing, and now they want to push those failures onto the rest of us. And this infrastructure package is going to go a long way in accomplishing that dastardly goal.
Yeah. I'm definitely getting the idea that it's not, the money is a huge issue too. And we could talk about inflation and all that another day, which is surely coming. But yeah, it's the control aspect which makes this even more insidious. We got about 30 seconds. How many votes does this need, and are Republicans going to go for it?
Well, it depends on which route they go to pass this. Likely, Congress is going to go the reconciliation route, which in shorthand means that they can pass this with a bare majority, even in the Senate, if they go this route.
Wow.
So it's an uphill battle to stopping this type of wasteful spending.
Why would they not go that route?
It'll be much harder to pass if it requires 60 votes to cut off a filibuster in the Senate. It does not appear that this package has the votes of 60 senators, but it quite possibly might have the support of 50+1.
Yeah, it's crazy. I bet it would. All right, Joel Griffith, Heritage Foundation. All right, let's talk again. We'll get another update as we get closer. Thanks, Joel.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you. That's brutal. All right, tomorrow it's our special. We're talking about the great conservative minds of the last 100 years. We'll get inspired by these great men. Do that tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.